Now, more stories, insights, and analysis of Illinois policy and politics. This is Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Once again, your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with Hilary Gowins, managing editor of the Illinois Policy Institute. And Hilary, this week, the Chicago Teachers Union telegraphed that they are prepared to strike, or maybe reiterate it. They've been saying that for several months now. Maybe as early as April 1st, if CPS goes through with the threat to stop making the 7% contribution to teachers' pensions that it's been making for the last 30 years, 7% of the total 9% that teachers contribute to their pensions, what's the average pension for a CPS teacher?
Well, I know the average salary is about $70,000, and lifetime payouts are about $2 million for most workers.
I saw that. I think the average pension for recently retired career teachers $73,350. That's in real dollars and present value. That's more like a pension that's north of $2 million.
Right.
So think about the average family. I mean, I always try and put this into like real dollars terms. The average family in Illinois, you know how long it takes to save $2 million to pay yourself $73,000 a year in retirement? Forever.
Right.
Infinity. You can't do it.
Well, and the median household income in Chicago is $40,000. So that's something to think about. And what's really sad is that instead of talking about kids and how we're going to improve the 66% graduation rate that CPS has.
And I don't even believe that number.
Right. Well, they have inflated it to 69 and since walked it back to 66. But instead of talking about kids and how we're going to improve education for 350,000 students, we're talking about asking people to pay into their retirement instead of us picking it up for them. Since 1981, Chicago has paid $1.2 billion in pension pickup costs.
Well, it's a third-party administrator for the adults in the system. I mean, that's just what CPS is. And it's interesting that 350,000 kids in the system. I remember not so long ago, that number was 400,000 kids. So you're seeing people flee that system, people who can, and of course those that cannot are the ones that are treated the worst at exorbitant prices. The strike that CTU, Chicago Teachers Union, is talking about, why wouldn't they strike? When they struck 3-4 years ago, they rolled Tiny Dancer and City Hall. So why wouldn't they do the same thing and receive the same benefit? They got $300 million increase in salary and benefits as a result of the last strike. Why not continue on? And if that means CPS has to borrow money at Tony Soprano rates, or somebody has to be carved up to fund their guaranteed salaries and pensions, then so be it. And what disincentive do they have to do that? Because who stood up and said no to them, except perhaps Governor Rauner?
Right. And if you look at Illinois labor law, they're actually not allowed to strike on April 1st based on the products that the steps that have to go into an actual strike. But that's exactly what they did in 2012. So, the rules don't really matter, I guess, to CPS and CTU.
Well, who's going to stop them?
Nobody's going to stop them. And they're saying that asking teachers to pay the full 9% toward their pension costs is an unfair labor practice. But the problem is that, they're not willing to come to the negotiation table in good faith. CPS is saying, we will give you raises if you just pay for your pension costs. And they're saying that that's unfair. But the truth is that Chicago teacher pensions have just half of the funding that they need to pay out for retirement costs now. So the system has to change.
And CPS, I mean, I don't want to give anyone the impression that CPS is wearing the white hat in this story. CPS, the latest toady in charge, Forrest Claypool, they're just as craven and disingenuous as the Chicago Teachers Union in terms of the finances. I mean, what's Forrest Claypool been doing, and Tiny Dancer by extension? They haven't been running down, they haven't been proposing structural reforms. They've been running down to Springfield with their tin cup saying, give us $500 million.
Right. Nobody wants to talk about structural reforms. They don't want to talk about what it's going to take to get kids an education. They don't want to talk about that. They want to talk about, well, get me this much money so that we can just make it by for another year. And
the other thing, too, you mentioned the inflated 66% graduation rate. Let's even take that to be true for the sake of discussion. What percentage of those 66% are coming out ready for the workforce or post-secondary education?
Well, it's really low. A lot of the kids who end up going to college after they graduate, whether it's a city college of Chicago or somewhere else, they end up having to take remedial courses anyway because they weren't ready to be in college in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I remember when the Consortium on Chicago School Research over at University of Chicago started looking at that. What is Chicago Public School graduate? What's really happening after they graduate? They found, this is about a decade old, they found initially that about 1 in 10 high school freshmen in CPS would get a bachelor's degree by the age of 25, excuse me, 1 in 10. So in 400,000 kids, now 350,000 kids, 1 in 10 will get a BA by 25. Now I think that number's moved up to maybe 1 in 6. But still, 16% of 350,000 kids that are going to get a bachelor's degree by the age of 25. Death of civilization numbers.
Right. I mean, this is a system that is just churning kids out, and, it's not good. Something's got to change. And, when you consider that in neighborhoods like Englewood, unemployment is hovering somewhere around 20%, there are neighborhoods in Chicago that are really struggling, and a lot of the kids in those neighborhoods are stuck going to CPS schools. They can't get out. There are no alternatives. The kids really suffer. They can't leave these schools. And here we are talking about teacher pensions. Discriminating
against children based on their household income and their address, disproportionately minority. Same thing with employment. Wall Street Journal this week, story on the state with the worst employment for African Americans in the country. The worst. Illinois, north of 14% in the fourth quarter of last year. Under Chicago Democrat rule, the Black Caucus in the City Council, the Black Caucus in the General Assembly, the Chicago Democrats who have run the city of Chicago for 100 years, who's being left behind?
Yeah. Kids just don't have hope.